They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but let me tell you something. When you've spent 14 years being told you're worthless, crazy, and invisible in your own home, revenge becomes something else entirely. It becomes survival, it becomes justice. And yes, it becomes sweet. My name is Dorothy Mae Jenkins, and I glued my husband to his bed. But that's not even the most shocking part of my story. What came after? The truth that spilled out, the family that rallied, and the woman I became. That's what will break your heart and put it back together again. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. I want you to understand something right from the start. I wasn't always this woman who could plan and execute what some people called an act of revenge, and what I call an act of reclamation. 14 years ago, I was Dorothy Mae Jenkins, a woman who had survived the death of her beloved first husband, who had raised 3 beautiful children on a cafeteria worker's salary, who had laughed at church picnics and baked sweet potato pies for every holiday. I was visible. I was loved. I was whole. Then I met Harold Mitchell at a grief support group of all places. He was 61 to my 58, silver-haired, well-dressed, with a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He talked about losing his wife to cancer, about how the house felt too big and empty, about how he just wanted someone to share morning coffee with and watch the sunset. He said all the right things. He held doors. He brought me flowers, not fancy roses but daisies, because I'd mentioned once that they reminded me of my grandmother's garden. My children were cautious at first. My daughter Angela, who was 34 then, took me aside after Harold and I had been dating for 3 months. "Mama," she said, holding my hands in hers, "I just want you to be careful. You don't really know this man." But I thought I did. I thought I knew him because he cried when he talked about his late wife. I thought I knew him because he went to church every Sunday and volunteered at the food bank. I thought I knew him because after 27 years of being married to James, my first husband, God rest his soul, I knew what a good man looked like. I was wrong. We married 6 months after we met, in a small ceremony at my church. My children came, but I could see the worry in their eyes. My son Marcus walked me down the aisle, and when he handed me over to Harold, he whispered, "You call me anytime, Mama. Anytime you need anything." I squeezed his hand and smiled, thinking he was just being overprotective. The first year was fine, good even. Harold moved into my house, the house James and I had bought 30 years ago, the house where my children had grown up. He said it made sense because it was bigger than his condo. He paid half the bills. He cooked dinner sometimes. He seemed like a companion, which was all I really wanted. But then things started to change. Small things at first. He began making comments about my children's visits. "Angela just left 2 days ago. Does she have to come by again already?" Or, "Marcus called 3 times this week. Doesn't he have his own family to worry about?" He'd say it with a little laugh, like he was joking, but there was an edge to his voice that made my stomach tighten. Then he started questioning my spending. I'd come home from the grocery store, and he'd go through the bags, holding up items. "Did you really need the name brand? The store brand is $3 cheaper." Or, "How much did you spend on that dress? You have a closet full of clothes already." Mind you, this was my money, my social security, my pension from 30 years of working in that school cafeteria, serving children their lunches, making sure the ones who couldn't afford to pay still got fed. But Harold made me feel like I had to justify every purchase, every decision. The worst part was how he did it all with a smile, how he'd undermine me in front of my children and then act confused when I got upset. "I was just trying to help, Dorothy. You're so sensitive lately. Are you feeling okay?" That became his favorite phrase. "Are you feeling okay?" As if my anger, my hurt, my frustration weren't valid responses to his behavior. As if I was the problem. By the end of the 2nd year, my children's visits had dropped to once every few weeks. Not because they didn't want to see me, but because Harold made every visit so uncomfortable. He'd sit in his chair and sigh loudly when they talked. He'd make passive, aggressive comments about how young people today don't understand respect, or how some children just can't let their parents have their own lives. Angela confronted him once. It was a Sunday afternoon, and she'd brought her 2 kids over for lunch. Harold made a comment about how loud the children were being, even though they were just playing in the backyard. Angela, bless her heart, stood up and said, "Harold, this is their grandmother's house. They're allowed to be children here." He stood up too, his face turning red. "This is my house too, Angela, and I won't be disrespected by someone else's child in my own home." "Someone else's child?" Angela's voice shook. "I'm her daughter. I was born in this house. I should have defended her right then. I should have stood up and told Harold that he was out of line, that this was indeed my daughter's home long before it was his. But I didn't. I was frozen, caught between this man I'd married and the daughter I'd given birth to. So I did the worst thing possible. I tried to keep the peace. Let's all just calm down, I said, my voice small and pleading. Angela, honey, Harold didn't mean it like that. And Harold, please, she's just trying to have a nice visit with her mama. Angela looked at me with tears in her eyes. The disappointment on her face cut deeper than any knife. She gathered her children and left. At the door she turned back and said, "Call me when you're ready to stand up for yourself. Mama, I'll be waiting." She didn't visit again for 3 months. That's how it worked. Harold would create conflict, I would try to smooth it over, and my children would pull away, not from me but from the situation. From him. And slowly, without even realizing it was happening, I became more and more isolated. By year 3, Harold had convinced me to put him on my bank account. It's just easier this way, Dorothy. We're married. What's yours is mine and what's mine is yours, right? But somehow what was mine became his to control, and what was his remained his alone. He started making decisions without consulting me. He canceled my magazine subscriptions because they were waste of money. He told my church group I couldn't host Bible study anymore because stressed me out too much. He screened my phone calls and told people I was resting or not feeling well when I was standing right there, wanting to talk. I watched myself disappear piece by piece. The woman who had raised 3 children alone after her husband died, who had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, who had been strong and capable and independent. She faded like a photograph left in the sun. And Harold became more and more comfortable showing his true self. The charm he'd used to win me over was gone. Now there were just demands and criticisms and that constant, dripping condescension that made me question my own mind. "You're getting forgetful, Dorothy. You told me you'd pick up my prescription, but I hadn't forgotten, he'd never asked me to. You're being dramatic, Dorothy. I never said that, you must be confused. I wasn't confused, I was being erased. The worst moments were the ones when I'd catch glimpses of who I used to be. I'd be at the grocery store, and I'd see someone from my old church group, and they'd hug me and ask where I'd been. Harold and I have just been keeping to ourselves. I'd say, and I'd hear how hollow my voice sounded. Or I'd be washing dishes and catch my reflection in the window, an old woman with hunched shoulders and sad eyes, and I'd think, when did I become her? My children tried. God bless them, they really did try. Marcus would call and ask to take me to lunch, just the 2 of us. Harold would get on the phone and say, "Your mother and I have plans that day, son. Maybe another time." There was never another time. Angela sent me a cell phone for my birthday with a note that said, "Keep this one just for you and me, Mama." Harold found it and returned it, saying I didn't need 2 phones, that it was wasteful. My youngest, Theresa, who lived 3 states away, she was the most persistent. She'd call the house phone when she knew Harold would be at his weekly poker game. "Mama, are you okay? Really okay?" she'd ask. And I'd want to tell her no, that I wasn't okay, that I was drowning in my own home. But the walls had ears, and Harold always seemed to know when I'd been talking about him. So I'd say, "I'm fine, baby. Just getting older, you know how it is." The turning point, the beginning of my awakening, came on a Tuesday morning in what would be year 13 of my marriage to Harold. I was 70 years old, and I felt like I was 100. I had fallen in the bathroom the night before. Nothing serious, just slipped on a wet spot and bruised my hip pretty badly. Harold had been in the living room watching television. I called for him, but he didn't come. I pulled myself up using the sink, pain shooting through my side, and limped to the living room. "Harold," I fell. "I think I need to go to the doctor." He didn't even look away from the screen. "You're fine, Dorothy. You're always making a fuss about something. Take some aspirin and go to bed." The next morning my hip was purple and green, and the pain was so bad I could barely walk. But I had a doctor's appointment scheduled, my annual physical with Dr. Lisa Chen, the physician I'd been seeing for the past 5 years. Harold drove me, complaining the whole way about how this was cutting into his day, how he had things to do, how I should have been more careful. When we got to the doctor's office, he started to come in with me. Dr. Chen's nurse, a kind woman named Maria, smiled and said, "Mr. Mitchell, we need to take Mrs. Jenkins back for her physical. You can wait here in the lobby. We'll call you when we're done." Harold's jaw tightened, but he sat down. I could feel his eyes on my back as I walked through the door to the examination rooms. In that little room, with its paper-covered table and posters about blood pressure and diabetes, something inside me finally cracked open. Dr. Chen came in, took one look at me, and closed the door quietly behind her. "Dorothy," she said gently, sitting down on the rolling stool so we were at eye level, "I need you to be honest with me. How did you get those bruises on your arms, and what's going on with your hip?" I opened my mouth to give her the story I'd prepared. I'd been clumsy, I'd fallen, I was just getting old and unsteady. But when I looked into her kind, concerned eyes, the words wouldn't come. Instead, tears came. 14 years of tears that I'd been holding back, swallowing down, pretending didn't exist. And I told her everything. Dr. Chen didn't interrupt me once. She sat there on that little rolling stool, her hands folded in her lap, and she listened. Really listened. Not the way Harold listened, where you could see him just waiting for his turn to tell you why you were wrong. Not the way even well-meaning friends sometimes listen, where they're already forming advice before you finished speaking. Dr. Chen listened like what I was saying mattered. Like I mattered. When I finally ran out of words, when the tears had slowed to just occasional drips that I wiped away with the rough tissue from the box she'd handed me, she reached out and gently touched my hand. Dorothy, what you're describing is called elder abuse, she said quietly. Financial exploitation, emotional abuse, isolation from your support system. These are all recognized forms of abuse, and they're not okay. None of this is your fault. Elder abuse. I'd heard the term before, seen stories on the news about terrible people stealing from their elderly parents or hitting them. But that wasn't me. Harold had never hit me. He just controlled me, belittled me, made me feel small. That wasn't the same thing, was it? Chen must have seen the doubt on my face because she continued. Abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises, Dorothy. The wounds you're carrying are real, even if other people can't see them. And you deserve help. She examined my hip, which was badly bruised but not broken, and documented everything in my file. Then she did something that changed the trajectory of my entire life. She gave me a small object that looked like a package of hearing aid batteries. This, she said, keeping her voice low even though we were alone in the room, is a recording device. It's voice activated and can record up to 8 hours before you need to download the files to a computer. I'm going to give you the website where you can access the recordings. I stared at the small package in my hand. Why would I need this? Because the truth is powerful, Dorothy. And sometimes when we've been told for so long that we're wrong, that we're confused, that we're the problem, sometimes we need proof. For ourselves as much as for anyone else. She paused, then added. And because if you ever decide you want to take legal action, or if you want your children to truly understand what's been happening, evidence matters. Legal action. The words felt foreign in my mouth. He's my husband. He's also someone who is harming you, Dr. Chen said firmly. You don't have to decide anything today. Just keep this somewhere safe. Use it if and when you're ready. And Dorothy, she waited until I met her eyes. You're stronger than you think you are. I see a lot of patience and I can tell you. The fact that you're still here, still yourself underneath all of this, that takes incredible strength. I left that appointment with pain medication for my hip, a pamphlet about elder abuse resources tucked deep in my purse where Harold wouldn't see it, and that small recording device hidden in my coat pocket. Harold was annoyed that the appointment had taken so long. He complained all the way home about missing his lunch, about how doctors always run late, about how I'd probably just pulled a muscle and made him waste his whole morning. I said nothing. But for the first time in years, I was thinking. That night, while Harold snored in his recliner in front of the television, I sat at the kitchen table and really looked at my life. I thought about the woman I'd been before, Dorothy Mai, who had survived her husband's death and hadn't let it break her, who had worked 2 jobs and still made it to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that mattered to her children, who had been respected in her community, who had hosted holiday dinners for 30 people, who had sung solos in the church choir. Where had she gone? How had I let her disappear? The answer was complicated and simple at the same time. I'd let her disappear one small compromise at a time, one moment of keeping the peace at a time, one instance of doubting myself instead of trusting my own experience. I'd let her disappear because I'd been taught my whole life that a good woman puts others first, that a good wife doesn't cause conflict, that at my age, I should just be grateful to have a companion and not rock the boat. But I wasn't grateful. I was miserable. And I was tired of pretending otherwise. I started small. The next day, when Harold was out at his poker game, I took that recording device out of its hiding place in my sewing basket. I read the simple instructions, figured out how to activate it, and placed it in the living room bookshelf, tucked behind a photo of my grandchildren, where Harold would never notice it. For the first few days, I didn't catch much. Just Harold talking on the phone to his friends, complaining about me. Dorothy's getting so difficult lately. I swear, she's losing her mind. Can't remember anything. Gets upset over nothing. Each word was like a small cut, but I kept the device running. Then, about a week after my doctor's appointment, Angela called. She wanted to come by for Sunday dinner, to bring the grandkids. I was so happy I almost cried. But Harold's face darkened. Tell her we're busy, he said. Harold, please. I haven't seen my grandbabies in over a month, it's just Sunday dinner. I said we're busy, Dorothy. His voice had that edge to it, the one that usually made me back down. But something in me had shifted. Maybe it was Dr. Chen's words echoing in my head. Maybe it was knowing that this conversation was being recorded. Maybe I was just tired of disappearing. No, I said quietly. I want to see my daughter and my grandchildren. They're coming for Sunday dinner. Harold stood up from his chair, and for a moment I thought he might actually hit me. His face was red, his hands were clenched into fists. You don't tell me no in my house, Dorothy. You don't get to just do whatever you want without asking me first. This is my house, Harold. I owned it 30 years before I met you. What happened next I'll never forget. He stepped closer to me, so close I could smell the coffee on his breath, and he said, in a voice so cold it made my blood freeze, your house. Let me tell you something, you stupid old woman. Without me you'd be in some nursing home drooling in a corner. Your kids don't want you. They just feel sorry for you. I'm the only one who puts up with your forgetful, useless self. So yes, this is my house now. And if you don't like it, there's the door. The recording device caught every word. I didn't say anything else. I called Angela back when Harold left the room and told her Sunday dinner was on. Harold was furious, but he couldn't stop it without making himself look bad, which was something he cared about deeply. He'd built his reputation in our community as a devoted husband, a good Christian man. He couldn't let that mask slip in front of my children. Sunday dinner was tense. Harold sat at the head of my table, the table James and I had bought at an estate sale when we were newlyweds, and he barely spoke. When he did, it was to make little comments designed to embarrass me. Dorothy's been so forgetful lately. Last week she couldn't even remember what day trash pickup was. Or, your mother's been very emotional recently. I think it might be time to talk to her doctor about some medication. I saw Angela's face tighten with each comment. I saw my son-in-law Robert exchange glances with her. My grandchildren, sweet babies aged 8 and 10, were quiet and uncomfortable, picking at their food. After dinner, Angela helped me in the kitchen while Harold took Robert out to the garage to show him some tool he'd bought. The kids were watching television in the living room, right where that recording device sat hidden behind their photo. Mama? Angela said, her voice low and urgent. What's going on, really? I wanted to tell her everything. But the habit of protecting Harold, of maintaining the illusion, was so ingrained. Nothing, baby. Harold's just, he gets grumpy sometimes. Mama, this isn't grumpy. This is mean. The way he talks to you, the way he talks about you, it's not right. She grabbed my hand, soapy with dishwater. Please. Talk to me. I looked at my daughter, my firstborn, who had inherited her father's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. I thought about Dr. Chen's words. I thought about that recording device capturing Harold's cruel truth. And I almost told her. Almost. But then Harold and Robert came back inside, and the moment was gone. Angela left with her family, hugging me extra tight at the door. I love you, Mama, she whispered. Please call me anytime. Over the next 6 months, I became a different kind of woman. On the outside, I was still Dorothy, Harold's wife, getting smaller and more invisible by the day. But on the inside, I was documenting everything, recording his verbal abuse, noting each time he controlled my money, my phone calls, my time, writing down dates and details in a little notebook I kept hidden in my winter coat pocket, the one Harold never looked at because he was too cheap to pay for dry cleaning. The recordings were damning. Harold's rage when he thought no one was listening. His mockery of me to his friends. The time he told his brother on the phone that he'd married me because she had that big house and a decent pension. Not the prettiest option, but the most practical one. The conversations where he talked about my money like it was his, discussing investments he'd made without telling me, money he'd moved around in accounts I didn't even know existed. Dr. Chen became my ally. Every month, I'd go to my appointment, and she'd help me download the recordings to a secure cloud account she'd set up for me. She never pushed me to take action. She just quietly supported me, documented the stress-related health issues I was developing, high blood pressure, anxiety, insomnia, and made sure I knew I had options. Whenever you're ready, Dorothy, she'd say. There's no timeline on reclaiming your life. But I wasn't ready, not yet. Because as much evidence as I had of Harold's emotional and financial abuse, I knew my children would ask why I'd stayed so long. Why I'd let it get this bad. Why I hadn't said something sooner. And I didn't have good answers to those questions. I barely understood it myself. Then, on a cold February morning, 14 years and 2 months after I'd married Harold Mitchell, everything changed. Harold had a stroke. It was a minor one, the doctors said. He'd recover most of his mobility and speech with physical therapy. But for now, for the next several weeks at least, he would be largely bedridden and dependent on care. Dependent on me. I stood in that hospital room, looking at Harold in his bed, an IV in his arm, his face slack on one side, his speech slightly slurred, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 14 years, power. The doctor was talking about home care options, about physical therapy schedules, about medications and warning signs to watch for. Harold's eyes followed me around the room, and for the first time, I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Fear. He was afraid of being at my mercy. After 14 years of making me afraid, of keeping me small and controlled and dependent, he was now the dependent one. And he knew, somewhere in that calculating mind of his, that he'd given me every reason to walk away. But I didn't walk away. Not yet. 'Cause I'd spent 6 months gathering evidence, documenting abuse, and planning. And I wasn't going to waste this opportunity for justice just to escape. I was going to make sure Harold faced consequences. I was going to make sure my children knew the truth. I was going to make sure that when this was over, I got my life back. All of it. I smiled at the doctor and said, "Of course I'll take care of him. He's my husband. For better or worse, right?" Harold's eyes widened slightly. Even with half his face not working properly, I could see he understood. The woman he'd spent 14 years breaking was gone. And in her place was someone he should have feared all along. Me, Dorothy Mae Jenkins. Finally awake, finally angry, and finally ready to act. They sent Harold home 3 days later with a walker, a list of medications as long as my arm, and instructions for physical therapy 3 times a week. The social worker at the hospital had tried to talk to me about respite care, about getting help, about how demanding it would be to care for a stroke patient at my age. "I'll manage," I told her with a sweet smile. I took care of my first husband through his illness. I know what I'm doing. What I didn't tell her was that James had been kind even when he was dying. That caring for him had been an act of love, not duty. That every moment with James, even the hard ones, had been a privilege. Harold would get care, but it would be the bare minimum required by law and human decency. Nothing more. The first week was revealing. Harold couldn't do much for himself. He needed help getting to the bathroom, help bathing, help getting dressed. Every time I helped him, I saw the humiliation in his eyes. The man who had spent 14 years making me feel worthless now had to depend on me for the most basic dignities. I wasn't cruel. I need you to understand that. I didn't withhold care or hurt him, or take pleasure in his suffering. But I also wasn't warm. I wasn't the devoted wife he'd presented me as to the outside world. I was efficient. Clinical. I did what needed to be done, and nothing more. "Dorothy," he said one morning, his speech still slightly slurred, "could you bring me some water?" "In a minute. I'm finishing the dishes, please." "I'm thirsty now," I said. "In a minute, Harold. I'll get to it when I'm ready." The look on his face, that mixture of frustration and impotent anger, it was the same look I'd worn for 14 years. Funny how quickly the tables could turn. During his second week home, I called Dr. Chen for my regular appointment. But this time, I had a specific purpose. "I need your help," I told her once we were alone in the examination room. "I'm ready to act, but I need to do this right. I need to make sure my children understand the full truth. And I need to make sure Harold faces real consequences." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "What are you thinking?" I laid out my plan. It was simple, really. Almost elegant in its simplicity. I would continue to care for Harold until he was well enough to be left alone for a few hours. Then I would invite my children over, all 3 of them, on a day when Harold would be home. I would play them the recordings. All of them. 6 months' worth of Harold's cruelty captured in his own words. But that wasn't enough. People can dismiss recordings. They can say things were taken out of context, that it wasn't as bad as it sounded. I needed my children to see Harold's true nature with their own eyes. I needed them to witness his rage, his contempt, his complete lack of the charm he showed the outside world. "I need something that will keep him in one place," I said carefully. "Something that will make him unable to hide or leave when my children arrive. Something that will frustrate him enough that his mask will slip completely, but that won't actually harm him." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small bottle. "This is a medical-grade adhesive. We use it sometimes for securing wound dressings or medical devices to skin. It's very strong, designed to stay in place through sweating, movement, water exposure. But it will eventually release with the right solvent, or naturally after 24 to 48 hours as the skin cells beneath it shed." She set the bottle on the desk between us. "If someone were to apply this to bedsheets while someone was sleeping, and that person was lying on those sheets, they would be quite thoroughly stuck when they woke up. It wouldn't hurt them. The skin might be irritated when it's removed, but there would be no lasting damage. However," she looked at me directly, "it would be very frustrating. Very frightening even, for someone who couldn't understand what had happened." "Would it be illegal?" I asked. "That's a complicated question. It's not assault if there's no injury. It's not kidnapping if it's in someone's own home. It might be considered some form of restraint, but in the context of elder abuse, when the person doing the restraining has been the victim." She shrugged. "I'm not a lawyer, Dorothy. But I know that sometimes unconventional actions lead to important truths being revealed. I took the bottle. I also took her contact information for an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases and for adult protective services. Everything was coming together. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Harold grow stronger. The physical therapy was working. His speech was improving. His mobility was returning. He was starting to make demands again instead of requests. Starting to criticize again. The gratitude he'd shown those first few days, born of fear and necessity, was evaporating like morning dew. One night, when I brought him his dinner on a tray, something else he demanded, even though he could now walk to the table just fine, he looked at the food and pushed it away. "I'm not eating this slop. Make me something else." It was chicken and rice, the same meal I'd made 100 times before. The same meal he'd eaten without complaint. But now that he felt stronger, the contempt was back. "That's what we're having for dinner, Harold. If you don't want it, don't eat it." His face reddened. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I'm your husband. And I'm your caretaker. Without me, you'd be in a nursing home. So eat your dinner or don't. It's your choice." He ate it. But the look he gave me was pure hatred. I knew then that as soon as he was fully recovered, it would all go back to how it was before. Maybe worse, because now I'd seen behind his mask and he knew it. I accelerated my timeline. I called Angela first. "Honey, I need you, Marcus, and Larissa to come over this Saturday at 2 o'clock, all of you. It's important." "Mama, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. But I need to tell you all something, and I need to tell you together. Please. Just trust me." She agreed, though I could hear the worry in her voice. Marcus was easier. He just said he'd be there. Larissa had to book a last-minute flight, but when I told her it was urgent, she didn't hesitate. Harold didn't know about the meeting. I told him my children were coming for a visit, but I didn't tell him when. I let him think it would be Sunday, our usual day. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I lay awake going over the plan, checking for flaws, wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. But then I'd think about 14 years of being made invisible. 14 years of being told I was the problem. 14 years of being separated from my children because of this man's cruelty. No, this wasn't a mistake. This was justice. Saturday morning, I woke at dawn. Harold was still sleeping. He'd been staying up late watching television now that he felt better, and sleeping in until 9 or 10. That gave me time. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the sun rise through the window. The same window I'd looked through for 40 years, first with James, then alone, then with Harold. But after today, I'd look through it alone again. And this time I'd be free. At 8 o'clock, I checked on Harold. Still sleeping, snoring softly. I took out the bottle Dr. Chen had given me. My hands were shaking slightly as I carefully applied the adhesive to the sheet beneath him. Not where his head was, but where his torso and hips lay. I did it in strips, working carefully and quietly. The adhesive was clear and dried quickly. Unless he looked very carefully at the sheet, he'd never notice it. Then I went back to the kitchen and waited. At 9:30, I heard him stirring. At 9:45, I heard him try to sit up. At 9:50, I heard him yelling, "Dorothy! Dorothy, get in here!" Something's wrong. I took my time walking to the bedroom. When I opened the door, Harold was lying flat on his back, pulling at the sheet with his hands. His pajama shirt was stuck to it. His pajama pants were stuck to it. Every time he tried to sit up or roll over. "What did you do?" he demanded, his face red with fury and fear. "What is this?" "It's accountability, Harold," I said calmly. "My children will be here at 2 o'clock. You're going to stay right there until they arrive, and then we're all going to have a conversation." "You crazy witch! You can't do this! This is assault!" This is 14 years of consequences catching up to you." I interrupted. "Now I'm going to bring you some water and something to eat, because I'm not a monster. But you're staying in that bed until my children get here. And then, Harold, you're going to see what happens when someone finally tells the truth about you." I walked out of the room and closed the door. Behind me, I could hear him yelling, cursing, threatening. But there was nothing he could do. He was stuck. And for the first time in 14 years, I felt like I could breathe. The hours until 2 o'clock felt both endless and too short. I prepared the living room, setting up Dr. Chen's laptop with the audio files ready to play. I made coffee and put out some of the cookies my grandchildren loved. Angela would have brought them, and I wanted them to feel comfortable, even though what they were about to hear would be anything but comfortable. Harold had gone through stages. Anger, then bargaining, then threats, then back to anger. He'd tried everything to get me to release him. Promises that he'd be better, threats to call the police. Appeals to my sense of decency as a Christian woman. I brought him food and water. I helped him use a bedpan. The humiliation on his face was something I'll never forget. But I didn't release him. This was happening. After 14 years, my children were finally going to know the truth. At 1:55, I heard cars pulling into the driveway. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. This was it. No turning back now. I opened the door to find all three of my children standing there, their faces full of concern and confusion. Angela, Marcus, and Theresa, my babies, all grown up, all looking at their mama like they were trying to figure out what kind of trouble she was in. "Come in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk, and you need to hear something." They came inside, exchanging worried glances. From the bedroom, I could hear Harold's voice rising again, calling my name, demanding to be released. "Mama," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. "What's going on? Why is Harold yelling?" I looked at my three children. The people I loved most in this world, the people I'd been separated from for so long by a man's cruelty and my own fear. I took a deep breath. "Sit down," I said. "There's something I need you to hear. And then there's someone you need to meet. The real Harold Mitchell." My children sat on my couch, the same couch where they'd watched Saturday morning cartoons as children, where they'd done homework, where they'd brought their own children for visits. Angela was in the middle, with Marcus on her left and Theresa on her right. They looked at me with a mixture of concern and confusion, occasionally glancing toward the bedroom, where Harold's voice had gone quiet, which was somehow more unsettling than his yelling. I sat in the chair across from them, my hands folded in my lap. For a moment, I couldn't find the words. How do you tell your children that you've spent 14 years being abused? How do you explain why you didn't tell them sooner? Why you pushed them away? Why you let it get this bad? "Mama," Angela said gently, reaching out her hand. "Whatever it is, just tell us. We're here." I took a breath and started talking. 14 years ago, I married Harold Mitchell because I was lonely and he seemed kind. I thought I knew what a good man looked like because I'd been married to one for 27 years. Your daddy was a good man. My voice broke slightly on those words. But Harold isn't your daddy. He's not even close. I told them everything. About how the control started slowly. The comments about their visits, the criticism of my spending, the way he made me doubt myself. About how he isolated me from them, from my friends, from my church community. About how he took control of my money, canceled my subscriptions, screened my calls. About the verbal abuse, the mockery, the constant message that I was worthless, forgetful, a burden. Marcus's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Theresa had tears streaming down her face. Angela just sat there, her eyes never leaving mine, her hand gripping the couch cushion so hard her knuckles were white. "Why didn't you tell us?" Marcus finally said, his voice rough. "Mama, why didn't you say something? We would have helped you. We would have." "I know, baby, I know. But he made me believe it was my fault. That I was the problem. That you all thought I was difficult and senile, and that he was the only one patient enough to deal with me." I wiped at my eyes. And I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I'd let this happen, that I'd chosen this man, that I'd pushed you all away to keep peace with someone who didn't deserve peace. "There's more," I said, gesturing to the laptop on the coffee table. 6 months ago, my doctor gave me a recording device. I've been documenting everything. I need you to hear this. I need you to understand that I'm not exaggerating, that I'm not misremembering, that this is real. I pressed play on the first recording. Harold's voice filled the room, clear and cruel. It was the conversation from that day he'd tried to keep Angela from visiting, the one where he'd called me a stupid old woman and said my children didn't want me. The room was silent except for the recording. I watched my children's faces change as they listened. Shock, then anger, then something harder. I played more. The conversation where Harold told his brother he'd married me for my house and pension. The times he'd mocked me to his friends, called me senile, made jokes about putting me in a nursing home. The casual cruelty of his daily interactions with me, telling me I was worthless, that I couldn't do anything right, that I was lucky he put up with me. By the time I stopped the recordings, Theresa was sobbing openly. Marcus had stood up and was pacing, his fists clenched. Angela just sat there, her face pale, tears running silently down her cheeks. "That's not even all of it," I said quietly. "There are hours more, but I think you get the picture." "I'm gonna kill him," Marcus said flatly. "I'm gonna go in there and—" "No," I said firmly. "That's not why I showed you this. I didn't survive 14 years of his abuse just to watch you throw your life away on him. He's not worth it." "Then why, Mama?" Angela asked, her voice thick with tears. "Why are we here? Why is he in there yelling? What did you do?" I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years in my bones. "He had a stroke a few weeks ago. Minor, but it left him weak, dependent on me. And I realized something. He was going to recover, and when he did, it would all go back to the way it was. Maybe worse. So I decided I was done being silent. Done being invisible. Done letting him control my life. I walked to the bedroom door and opened it. "Come with me, there's something you need to see." Harold was still stuck to the bed, though he'd managed to pull his shirt partially free, tearing it in the process. His face was red, his hair disheveled, and when he saw me walk in with my 3 children behind me, his expression went through a rapid transformation. Fear, then calculation, then a forced smile. "Oh, thank God," he said, his voice taking on a weak, confused quality. "Kid, something's wrong. I think your mother did something to the bed. I'm stuck and I can't get up. I think maybe she's not well. This isn't like her." It was masterful, really. In 2 seconds, he'd tried to make himself the victim and me the one who was unwell. Even now, even caught and helpless, he was trying to manipulate the situation. But my children had just heard the recordings. They'd just heard his real voice, his real thoughts, his real cruelty. They knew better now. "You son of a..." Marcus started forward, but Angela caught his arm. "No," she said, her voice cold and controlled. "He's not worth it. And Mama didn't bring us here to watch us commit assault." She stepped closer to the bed, looking down at Harold with undisguised contempt. "We heard the recordings, Harold. All of them. We know what you are." Harold's face changed again. The false confusion dropped away, replaced by anger. "You can't prove anything. Those recordings are probably illegal." "You can't." "I can prove that you've been financially exploiting our mother." Angela interrupted. She was a paralegal. I'd forgotten that in my planning, but it was turning out to be useful. "I can prove that you've been emotionally abusing her, and I can definitely prove that you're not the devoted husband you've pretended to be." "We're divorcing you," I said quietly. "I've already contacted an attorney. We're filing on Monday, and we're pressing charges for financial exploitation and elder abuse. Dr. Chen has documented everything, the stress-related health problems, the bruises, all of it." "You can't do this," Harold said, but his voice had lost its strength. "Dorothy, you need me. Who's going to take care of you? Who's going to?" "She doesn't need you," Theresa said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room. "She never needed you. She has us. She's always had us. You just made her forget that." Harold's face twisted into something ugly. "You ungrateful. After everything I've done for her, this is how she repays me. By turning you all against me with lies and..." "They're not lies," I said, my voice steady and strong. "They're the truth. Your truth. In your own words, and everyone is going to hear them now, the attorney, the police, adult protective services. Everyone. The glue will wear off in a day or so," I continued. "Dr. Chen says it won't cause any permanent damage, but I needed you to stay put long enough for my children to get here. I needed them to see you for what you really are. No charm, no manipulation. Just you, angry, cruel, and powerless." I turned to my children. "Marcus, would you call Adult Protective Services? Angela, can you help me pack some bags? I'm going to stay with you for a while if that's okay. And Theresa, honey, would you call the police? Non-emergency line. I want them to come take a report, document this situation, and make sure Harold doesn't try to claim I abandoned him or did something illegal." They moved into action immediately, grateful to have something to do. Harold was yelling again, but it didn't matter. His words had no power anymore. They were just noise. As I walked out of that bedroom for what I thought would be the last time, I heard him say one more thing. "Dorothy, please. I'm sorry, I'll change. Just give me another chance." I stopped and turned back. For a moment, I looked at this man who had taken 14 years of my life, who had made me invisible, who had separated me from my children and made me doubt my own mind. I thought about all the times he'd asked me to give him another chance, to forgive him, to understand that he didn't mean it, that he was just stressed or tired or worried about me. "No," I said simply. "You had 14 years of chances. You don't get another one." The police arrived within an hour. They were professional, documenting everything. The recordings, Harold's situation, my statement. One of the officers, a young woman with kind eyes, pulled me aside. "Mom, I want you to know. What you did, the glue thing, it's technically a gray area. But given the circumstances, the documented abuse, the fact that he's unharmed, and you're clearly acting to protect yourself and get help, I don't think you'll face any charges. And even if you did, any jury that heard those recordings would understand." Adult Protective Services came next. A caseworker named James, ironically the same name as my first husband, listened to everything, took copies of the recordings, and told me I'd done the right thing by documenting and reporting. "This is elder abuse," he said. "Financial exploitation, emotional abuse, isolation, all documented. We'll be opening an investigation. And I want you to know, Mrs. Jenkins, you're very brave. Most victims never report, never get out." By 6 o'clock that evening, I was at Angela's house with 2 suitcases of my belongings and a plan for moving forward. My grandchildren hugged me tight, and my daughter set me up in their guest room. A room with a window overlooking a garden, with soft blue walls and a comfortable bed. That night, lying in that strange but welcoming bed, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was free. After 14 years of being trapped, controlled, and made invisible, I was finally free. And the woman who had disappeared all those years ago, she was coming back, one breath at a time, The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. I'd expected to feel guilty, to second-guess myself, to worry that I'd gone too far. But I didn't. For the first time in 14 years, I felt clear, focused, like I was finally living my own life instead of being a supporting character in someone else's story. The attorney Angela helped me find was a woman named Patricia Okonkwo. She was in her 50s, sharp as a tack, and she specialized in elder abuse cases. When I first met with her in her downtown office, she listened to the recordings with no expression on her face. But when they finished, she looked at me with something like admiration. "Mrs. Jenkins, you've built an airtight case. 6 months of documented abuse, medical records from Dr. Chen showing the health impact, financial records that I'm betting will show unauthorized transactions. This is exactly what we need." She leaned forward. "How are you feeling about moving forward? Because this won't be easy. Harold will fight. He'll try to make you look vindictive or unstable. He'll probably paint himself as the victim. Let him try," I said. "I have the truth." In his own words, Patricia smiled. "Then let's get started." The divorce papers were filed first. Harold was served while he was still at the house. Our house, which I owned 30 years before I met him. The petition included requests for a restraining order, return of all marital assets, and compensation for financial exploitation. Harold's response was predictable. He hired an attorney and filed a counter petition claiming I'd abandoned him while he was ill, that I'd assaulted him by gluing him to the bed, and that I was mentally unfit. His attorney tried to paint him as a concerned husband who'd been dealing with his wife's declining mental health. But Patricia was ready. She submitted the recordings, Dr. Chen's medical documentation, statements from my children about the isolation and control, and financial records that showed Harold had moved over $70,000 from my accounts into his own over the years. Money he'd taken from my late husband's life insurance, my pension, and my savings. The restraining order was granted immediately. Harold was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from me, from Angela's house, and from any place he knew I frequented. The criminal investigation was slower but just as thorough. The detective assigned to my case, a man named Rodriguez, had clearly seen these situations before. He interviewed me, my children, Dr. Chen, even some of the neighbors who'd noticed my isolation over the years. One neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, told him she'd tried to invite me to book club multiple times, but Harold always answered the door and said I wasn't feeling well. I knew something was wrong. Mrs. Patterson told me later, tears in her eyes. But I didn't know what to do. "I'm so sorry I didn't push harder." "You have nothing to apologize for," I told her. He was very good at what he did. That's what makes this kind of abuse so insidious. 2 months after that Saturday when everything changed, Harold was formally charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person and emotional abuse. His mugshot appeared in the local paper. The man who'd been so concerned with his reputation, who'd built his entire identity around being a respected member of the community, was exposed. The fallout was immediate. The church where Harold had volunteered quietly asked him to step down. His poker group stopped inviting him. People who'd known us as a couple suddenly couldn't remember his name, but asked me how I was doing with genuine concern. I'd like to say I took no pleasure in his downfall, but that would be a lie. I did feel satisfaction. Not in his suffering exactly, but in the truth finally being known, in the mask being ripped away, in people seeing what I'd been living with for 14 years. But more than satisfaction, I felt relief. And something I hadn't felt in a very long time, hope. Living with Angela and her family was healing in ways I hadn't expected. My grandbabies, Emma and Jackson, they didn't know all the details of what had happened. They just knew Grandma was staying with them for a while, and they were thrilled. Emma, who was 10, would come home from school and sit with me while I helped her with homework. Jackson, 8 years old and full of energy, would show me his drawings and tell me elaborate stories about superheroes. "Grandma," he said one afternoon, "did you know that the strongest superheroes are the ones who are brave even when they're scared?" "Is that so?" I asked, smiling at him. "Yeah. My teacher said that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do the right thing anyway." He looked at me with those serious brown eyes. "Like you, Grandma." I had to turn away for a moment, tears suddenly stinging my eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Angela and Robert were gentle with me but also honest. One evening, after the kids were in bed, Angela sat down next to me on the couch. "Mama, I need to say something, and I need you to hear it." She took my hand. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry I didn't push harder when I felt something was wrong. I knew Harold was difficult, but I didn't realize I should have known." "Baby, no," I said, squeezing her hand. "This is not your fault. Harold was very good at hiding his true nature, and I was good at covering for him. We both played our parts in maintaining that illusion. But you're my mama. I should have protected you. You're my daughter, not my keeper. And the moment you knew the truth, you were there. That's what matters. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Angela said, "What are you going to do after all this is over? After the divorce is final and the legal stuff is done?" I'd been thinking about that question a lot. "I'm gonna live," I said simply. "Really live. Not just exist. I'm gonna get my house back. And I'm gonna fill it with people I love. I'm gonna volunteer at the food bank like I used to. I'm going to rejoin the church choir. I'm going to be Grandma Dorothy who bakes cookies and hosts Sunday dinners and doesn't apologize for taking up space." Angela smiled through her tears. I liked the sound of that. The Marcus visited every weekend, often bringing his wife Lisa and their teenage son David. Marcus struggled more than my daughters with what had happened. He felt guilty that he hadn't done something about Harold sooner, even though there was nothing he could have done without knowing the full truth. "I should have punched him," he said one Saturday, pacing in Angela's backyard while I sat in a lawn chair watching the kids play. "That first time he disrespected you, I should have laid him out." "And then what?" I asked calmly. "You'd have been arrested. Harold would have played the victim. And I'd have been more isolated than ever because he'd have said I couldn't see you because you were violent." Marcus sat down heavily in the chair next to me. "I just feel so powerless, Mama, like I failed you." "You didn't fail me, son. You loved me. You tried to stay connected even when Harold made it nearly impossible. You showed up when I finally asked you to. That's not failure. That's faithfulness." Theresa, who'd had to go back to her home in Arizona after a week, called me every single day. Sometimes we'd talk for an hour about everything and nothing. Sometimes she'd just call to hear my voice, to make sure I was okay. The distance was hard on her, but she was planning to visit once a month until everything was settled. "Mama," she said during one of our evening calls, "I keep thinking about all the times I sensed something was wrong, but let you convince me everything was fine. I hate that I wasn't there. Baby girl, you're here now. That's what counts. And honestly, if you'd all been there all the time, I might never have hit rock bottom. I might have kept making excuses, kept thinking it wasn't that bad. Sometimes we have to get to the breaking point before we can break free." 3 months after I left, my house was legally confirmed as my separate property. Harold had tried to claim it as marital property, but Patricia had the deed, had proof that it was purchased before our marriage, and had documentation that Harold had never contributed to the mortgage, because it had been paid off 20 years before we met. The judge also ordered Harold to repay the $70,000 he'd taken from my accounts, plus interest and legal fees. Harold's attorney argued that it was marital funds and he'd had a right to them, but the recordings where he specifically talked about taking her money and her dead husband's insurance payout undermined that argument pretty thoroughly. Harold was also convicted on the criminal charges. He was sentenced to 2 years probation, 100 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling. It wasn't prison time, but it was public record. It was accountability. It was more than most abusers ever face. The day the divorce was finalized, Patricia called me with the news. "It's done, Dorothy. You're free. The house is yours, the money is being returned, and Harold Mitchell is legally no longer your problem." I hung up the phone and sat in Angela's guest room for a long moment. Free. I was free. After 14 years, I was finally, legally, completely free. I walked downstairs to find Angela in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when I came in, and I must have had something on my face because she immediately put down her knife. "Mama, it's done," I said, and my voice broke. "It's finally done." She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and wrapped me in her arms. We stood there crying together, tears of relief, of grief for the lost years, of joy for the future that stretched ahead. That night, we had a celebration dinner. All 3 of my children, their spouses, and my grandchildren gathered around Angela's table. We had my famous sweet potato pie for dessert, and Jackson gave a toast in that serious way children have. "To Grandma Dorothy," he said, holding up his glass of apple juice, "the bravest superhero I know." Everyone echoed his toast, and I looked around at these faces I loved, these people I'd almost lost, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated, hard-won joy. The next week I moved back into my house. My children helped me clear out everything that was Harold's, which wasn't much really. Most of the furniture was mine from before. Most of the memories in that house were mine and James's and our children's. Harold had lived there for 14 years, but he'd never really been part of it. Not in the way that mattered. We repainted the bedroom a soft lavender color I'd always wanted but Harold had said was too feminine. We rearranged the furniture. We hung new pictures on the walls, photos of my children and grandchildren, of my parents and James, of me at various stages of my life looking happy and whole. When everyone left that first night and I was alone in my house, truly alone, truly free, I walked through each room slowly. The living room where I'd recorded Harold's cruelty. The kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals. The bedroom where I'd glued him to the bed and reclaimed my power. The bathroom where I'd fallen and decided enough was enough. Each room had been a place of pain. But now they were just rooms, walls and floors and windows, and I could fill them with whatever I wanted. With laughter, with family, with music and light and life. I sat in my rocking chair by the window and looked out at the street. The same street I'd looked at for 40 years. But I was seeing it differently now. Not as a prisoner looking out, but as a woman looking forward. The first few months back in my house were a process of reclamation. Not just of physical space, but of myself. I had to relearn how to live without fear. Without constantly monitoring my words, my actions, my spending. Without waiting for criticism or control. Simple things felt revolutionary. Buying the name brand coffee I preferred. Leaving dishes in the sink overnight because I was tired. Talking on the phone to my children without worrying about who might be listening. Playing my music as loud as I wanted. These small freedoms added up to something profound: autonomy. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when I'd catch myself falling into old patterns. I'd go to buy something and hesitate, hearing Harold's voice in my head asking if I really needed it. I'd make plans with Angela and feel a flutter of anxiety, like I was doing something wrong. I'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, heart racing, convinced I heard him in the house. Dr. Chen recommended a therapist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Williams, who specialized in trauma recovery. I was resistant at first. I'd never been to therapy in my life, and it felt like admitting weakness. But Dr. Chen said something that changed my mind. "Dorothy, you documented the abuse. You got yourself out. You fought for justice and won. Now do one more brave thing: heal." So I went. And Dr. Williams, with her gentle questions and patient listening, helped me understand things I hadn't even realized I needed to understand. What Harold did, she explained in one of our early sessions, was a systematic dismantling of your sense of self. He isolated you, controlled you, and made you doubt your own perceptions. That's not something that heals overnight. Your brain learned to operate in survival mode for 14 years. We need to teach it that it's safe now. Over the weeks and months, I learned about gaslighting, about coercive control, about the cycle of abuse. I learned that what happened to me had a name, a pattern, a psychology behind it. And somehow understanding it helped. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't a personal failing. It was a crime that had been committed against me, and I was a survivor. The nightmares gradually decreased. The anxiety when making simple decisions faded. The voice in my head that sounded like Harold grew quieter and quieter, until I could barely hear it at all. I also started building a life that was truly mine. I rejoined the church choir, and the first Sunday I stood up to sing, my voice cracked with emotion. But I kept singing, and by the end of the hymn I was strong and clear. Several people came up to me after service with tears in their eyes. "We missed you, Dorothy," Mrs. Patterson said, hugging me tight. "We're so glad you're back." I volunteered at the food bank every Tuesday and Thursday morning. It felt good to be useful again, to serve my community, to be around people who valued my presence. One of the other volunteers, a man named George who was widowed like me, asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime. "Just as friends," he said quickly, seeing the alarm on my face. "I know you've been through a lot. I just think you're good company, that's all." I went to coffee with George, and it was nice. Just two older people talking about their families, their memories, their lives. No pressure, no agenda. Just companionship. It reminded me that not all men were like Harold. That my first marriage to James hadn't been a fluke or a fantasy. That kindness was real and possible. I also started hosting Sunday dinners again. At first, it was just my children and grandchildren. But gradually I invited friends, neighbors, people from church. My house filled with laughter and conversation and the smell of good food. The rooms that had been so quiet for so long came alive again. One Sunday I had 15 people around my table. I looked at all those faces, some family, some friends, all people I loved or was learning to love, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what life was supposed to be, not isolation and control, not walking on eggshells, but this, connection, joy, fullness. Emma, my 10-year-old granddaughter, helped me clear plates after dinner. "Grandma," she said as we loaded the dishwasher, "you seem different than you used to." "Different how, baby?" "Happier." "Like you're more." She searched for the word, there. "Like before you were kind of see-through, but now you're solid." I had to stop and steady myself against the counter. See-through, that's exactly what I'd been, fading away, disappearing, and now I was solid again, visible, real. "Thank you for noticing that, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a long time." 6 months after I moved back into my house, I ran into Harold at the grocery store. I'd successfully avoided him up until that point. The restraining order had expired after 6 months, but I'd been careful about where I went and when. But there he was in the produce section, looking older and smaller than I remembered. He saw me at the same moment I saw him, and we both froze. For a second, I felt that old fear rise up. The instinct to make myself small, to avoid conflict, to just turn around and leave. But then I remembered who I was now, what I'd survived, what I'd overcome. I pushed my cart forward and continued my shopping. I didn't speak to him, didn't acknowledge him beyond that first glance. He was just another person in the store. Nobody important, nobody who had power over me anymore. As I passed him, I heard him say quietly, "Dorothy." I kept walking. I didn't owe him a conversation. I didn't owe him anything. At the checkout line, my hands were shaking slightly, but I was also proud. I'd seen him and I hadn't fallen apart. I'd seen him and I'd continued living my life. That was victory. When I told Dr. Williams about it in our next session, she smiled. "How do you feel about how you handled it?" "Strong," I said. And I meant it. Around this time, something unexpected happened. I was contacted by a local women's organization that worked with victims of domestic abuse. They'd heard about my case. Harold's conviction had been covered in the local paper, and they wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at one of their support groups. "We have a lot of older women who are experiencing abuse." The coordinator, a young woman named Sarah, told me over the phone, "But they don't report it. They don't think anyone will believe them, or they're ashamed, or they think it's too late to leave." Hearing from someone who got out, who fought back, who reclaimed her life, that could be really powerful. I wasn't sure at first. Talking about what happened to strangers felt exposing, vulnerable. But then I thought about all those women who were where I'd been a year ago. Invisible, trapped, believing the lies their abusers told them. "I'll do it," I said. The support group met in a community center on Tuesday evenings. When I walked in, there were about 20 women there, ranging in age from early 20s to late 80s. Some looked beaten down, shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor. Others looked angry. A few looked numb, like they'd stopped feeling anything at all. I recognized all of it. I'd been all of it. Sarah introduced me, and I stood up in front of these strangers and told my story. I didn't hold back. I told them about the isolation, the control, the financial exploitation. I told them about the glue, about the recordings, about the moment I decided I was done being invisible. When I finished, the room was silent. Then one woman, probably in her 60s, raised her hand. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice shaking. "How did you know it was time to leave?" "I keep thinking maybe it'll get better. Maybe if I just try harder." I looked at her, seeing myself in her eyes. "Honey, it doesn't get better. It gets worse. The trying harder you're doing, that's you trying to control someone else's choices. And you can't. The only person you can control is yourself. And the only question that matters is how much more of your life are you willing to give to someone who doesn't value it?" Another woman spoke up. "But I'm 73. Where would I even go? What would I do? I was 72 when I left." I said. "I'll tell you, went to my daughter's house. I got a lawyer. I got a therapist. I reconnected with my community, and I reclaimed my life. Is it scary? Yes. Is it hard? Absolutely. But you know what's harder? Spending whatever time you have left being treated like you don't matter." For the next hour we talked. Really talked. About fear and shame and hope. About resources and legal options and safety planning. About the fact that abuse doesn't have an age limit, and neither does freedom. When the meeting ended, several women came up to me. Some hugged me. Some thanked me. One woman, tears streaming down her face, said, "I'm going to call my son tomorrow. I'm going to tell him what's been happening. You made me believe I can do this." Driving home that night, I felt something profound settle in my chest. Purpose. My suffering hadn't been meaningless. It had taught me things that could help others. It had made me strong in a way I'd never been before. And now I could use that strength, that knowledge, that hard-won freedom to help other women find their way out of the darkness. I started speaking regularly at the support group. I also got trained as a volunteer advocate, helping women navigate the legal system, connecting them with resources, sometimes just sitting with them while they made hard phone calls or filled out paperwork. One woman I helped was named Betty. She was 81, and her husband of 60 years had become increasingly abusive after his dementia diagnosis. She felt trapped between love for the man he'd been and fear of the man he'd become. "I can't just leave him," she sobbed in one of our meetings. "He's sick." What kind of wife abandons a sick husband? A wife who recognizes that she can't help him if she's being hurt by him. I said gently, "Betty, you can love someone and still need to be safe. You can grieve who he was while protecting yourself from who he is now. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." We helped Betty get her husband into a memory care facility where he could get proper treatment while she lived safely in her own apartment. The last time I saw her, she looked 10 years younger. "I can visit him on my own terms now," she told me. "And when he's having a good day, I can remember our good years. When he's having a bad day, I can leave. I don't have to live in the bad days anymore." That's what freedom looked like. Not abandonment, not cruelty. Just the simple right to be safe in your own life. A year after I left Harold, I was asked to speak at a regional conference on elder abuse. There were social workers, attorneys, healthcare providers, and advocates from all over the state. I told my story to hundreds of people, and afterward, dozens came up to me with questions, with thanks, with their own stories. A young social worker, maybe in her 30s, caught me on my way out. "Mrs. Jenkins, I just wanted to say, I work in adult protective services, and I see cases like yours all the time. But most of them don't end like this. Most victims don't get out, they don't fight back, they just disappear. The fact that you survived, that you fought, that you won, that's remarkable." "It's not remarkable," I said. "It's necessary, and it shouldn't be rare. Every person, regardless of age, deserves to live without abuse. Deserves to be believed when they speak up. Deserves support when they try to get out. That shouldn't be remarkable. It should be basic human dignity." She nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. But until it is basic, stories like yours matter. They give people hope. They show what's possible." As I drove home from that conference, I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago. Trapped, invisible, convinced she was the problem. And I thought about the woman I was now. Free, visible, using her voice to help others. The revenge I'd taken against Harold, the glue, the recordings, the exposure, it had felt necessary at the time. And maybe it was. But this work I was doing now, this was the real revenge. Because Harold had tried to make me nothing. And instead, I'd become someone who mattered, someone who helped, someone who made a difference. That was the best revenge of all. Not his downfall, but my rise. 2 years after I glued Harold to that bed, I stood in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, making my famous sweet potato pie. The house smelled like cinnamon and nutmeg and brown sugar. Gospel music played on the radio. Through the window, I could see my grandchildren playing in the backyard, while Angela and Marcus set up tables for the family dinner we were hosting that afternoon. I caught my reflection in the window and paused. The woman looking back at me had gray hair she wore natural and proud. She had smile lines around her eyes. She stood straight, shoulders back, taking up space without apology. She looked like someone who knew her own worth. She looked like me, finally, completely me. The doorbell rang and I wiped my hands on my apron before answering it. It was Theresa, who'd moved back to California 6 months ago to be closer to family. Behind her was a woman I didn't recognize, younger, maybe in her 50s, with nervous eyes and hunched shoulders. "Mama?" Theresa said, hugging me tight. "This is Linda. She's a friend from my church. She's going through, well, something similar to what you went through. I told her you might be willing to talk to her." I looked at Linda, saw the shame and fear in her eyes and remembered. I remembered that feeling of being trapped, of thinking no one would understand, of believing you deserved what was happening to you. "Come in, honey," I said, taking Linda's hand. "Let's sit down and talk." And we sat in my living room, the same room where I'd recorded Harold's abuse, where I'd gathered the evidence that set me free. But now it was just a comfortable room filled with family photos and soft light and the smell of baking pie. Linda told me her story. It was different in the details but the same in all the ways that mattered. Control, isolation, gaslighting, financial abuse. The slow erosion of self until you couldn't remember who you'd been before. "I don't know how to leave," she whispered. "I'm 56. I haven't worked in 20 years. I don't have anywhere to go. My kids are grown and have their own lives. I feel so stupid for letting it get this bad." I reached over and took both her hands in mine. "Linda, look at me. You're not stupid. You're being abused. And abuse is designed to make you feel exactly how you're feeling right now, trapped, ashamed, like it's your fault. But it's not. It's his fault, and you can get out." I did. At 72 I got out. "And if I can do it, so can you." We talked for over an hour. I gave her the names of attorneys, therapists, advocates. I told her about resources, about safety planning, about the importance of documentation. But mostly, I just listened. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is simply believe them. When Linda left, "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for making me believe it's possible." "It's more than possible, honey," I said. "It's your right. Freedom is your right." The rest of my family started arriving around noon. Marcus and his family. Angela's crew was already here. Theresa was staying for the week. Friends from church. Neighbors. George, who'd become a dear friend over the past 2 years. My therapist, Dr. Williams, who I'd invited because she'd become more than just my therapist. She'd become someone I respected and cared for. We filled the house with food and laughter and love. The grandchildren ran through the rooms, their footsteps shaking the walls. The adults gathered around tables telling stories and sharing meals. This was what life was supposed to look like. What I'd almost forgotten was possible. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Jackson pulled on my sleeve. "Grandma, will you tell us the story?" He was 10 now, old enough to know some of what had happened, though we'd kept the details age appropriate. But he'd heard enough to understand that Grandma had been in a bad situation and had gotten herself out. I looked at Angela, who nodded. If you want a mama. They're old enough to hear it. So we all gathered in the living room. Kids and adults alike. And I told them the story, not all of it, not the darkest parts. But I told them about meeting Harold, about how he'd seemed kind at first, but had slowly shown his true nature. About how he'd tried to separate me from my family. About how I'd felt invisible and powerless. But then, I said, looking at each of my grandchildren, I remembered something important. I remembered that I was Dorothy Mae Jenkins. That I'd raised 3 beautiful children on my own after your grandpa James died. That I'd worked hard my whole life. That I was strong and capable and worthy of respect. And once I remembered that, I started fighting back. With the glue, Jackson said excitedly. He'd heard that part and thought it was the best thing ever. I laughed. Yes, with the glue. But that wasn't really the important part. The important part was that I used my voice. I told the truth. I asked for help. And I didn't give up until I got my life back. Emma, now 12 and wise beyond her years, asked, "You scared?" Terrified, I admitted. Every single day. But I did it anyway. Because being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. Like you said superheroes do, Jackson said, nodding seriously. Exactly like that, baby. A leader that evening, after everyone had left and I was alone in my quiet house, I sat in my rocking chair by the window. I thought about the journey I'd been on. About the woman who'd disappeared and the woman who'd come back. I thought about Harold too. Not with anger anymore, but with something closer to pity. I'd heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to another state, trying to escape his reputation. That he was living alone in a small apartment, his charm no longer enough to fool people once the truth was known. Part of me felt sorry for him, a sad old man who'd had to rely on control and cruelty. Because he didn't know how to connect with people genuinely. But mostly, I just didn't think about him much at all. He'd taken 14 years of my life, but he didn't get to take any more, not even space in my thoughts. I thought about all the women I'd helped over the past 2 years. The ones who'd left their abusers. The ones who were still planning their escapes. The ones who weren't ready yet but who kept my number just in case. I thought about Linda, who I'd met just that morning, and I said a little prayer that she'd find the strength to choose herself. I thought about my children, who'd rallied around me when I finally let them in. About my grandchildren, who were growing up knowing that their grandma was strong and brave. About the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of the one Harold had tried to burn down. And I thought about revenge. About whether what I'd done, the recordings, the glue, the public exposure, had been revenge or justice. I'd wrestled with that question a lot over the past 2 years. Williams had given me the best answer. Dorothy, you didn't hurt Harold for the sake of hurting him. You exposed the truth so that you could be free, and so that he couldn't hurt anyone else. That's not revenge. That's accountability. Revenge would have been if you'd acted out of pure spite, with no thought to your own healing or anyone else's safety. But everything you did served a purpose: protection, truth, justice. That's different. I decided she was right. What I'd done was stand up for myself when no one else could. I'd documented the truth. I'd asked for help. I'd used the legal system as it was designed to be used. And yes, I'd been creative about making sure Harold couldn't manipulate his way out of consequences. But I hadn't hurt him. I'd just stopped him from hurting me. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from a woman I'd met at the support group 3 months ago. Her name was Ruth, and she was 84. Dorothy, I did it. I filed for divorce today. I'm scared but I'm free. Thank you for showing me it was possible. I smiled and texted back. I'm so proud of you. Remember, you're not alone. Call me anytime. This was my life now. Not just surviving but thriving. Not just free but helping others find freedom. Not just visible, but using my visibility to shine a light on an issue too many people wanted to ignore. Elder abuse. It happened in nice neighborhoods and bad ones. It happened to educated women and uneducated ones. It happened to women who'd been strong their whole lives and women who'd always been timid. It didn't discriminate. And for too long it had been hidden, minimized, excused. But not anymore. Not if I had anything to say about it. I looked at the framed photo on the table next to me. It was from Thanksgiving, just a few months ago. All 3 of my children, their spouses, my 5 grandchildren, and me, right in the center, smiling with my arms around Emma and Jackson. I looked happy in that photo. I looked whole, because I was. People sometimes ask me if I regret marrying Harold, if I wish I could have those 14 years back. And honestly, yes and no. Yes, I wish I hadn't suffered. Yes, I wish I'd seen the truth sooner. Yes, I wish my children hadn't had to watch me disappear. But those 14 years taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. They taught me about resilience, about the strength that comes from hitting rock bottom and choosing to climb back up. They taught me about the importance of documentation, of believing victims, of holding abusers accountable. They taught me that it's never too late to reclaim your life. And they gave me a purpose I wouldn't have had otherwise. Because of what I went through, I can help other women. Because of what I survived, I can speak with authority about something that needs to be spoken about. Because of my pain, I can ease someone else's. Would I choose to go through it again? No. But I can choose what I do with it now, and I choose to use it for good. The clock chimed 9. I stood up slowly, my knees weren't what they used to be, and made my way to the kitchen. I'd make myself a cup of chamomile tea, maybe read for a bit before bed, simple pleasures. A simple evening in my own house on my own terms, living my own life. As I filled the kettle with water, I caught my reflection in the dark window one more time, and I smiled at the woman looking back at me. You did good, Dorothy May, I whispered to her. You did real good. She smiled back and I could see the truth in her eyes. The woman who had disappeared for 14 years, she was back. Stronger, wiser, more purposeful than ever before. And she was never disappearing again. If you're listening to this story and you see yourself in it, if you're being controlled, isolated, belittled, or hurt by someone who claims to love you, I want you to know something. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not the problem. And it's not too late. I was 72 when I left. 72 when I finally stood up for myself. 72 when I reclaimed my life. And if I can do it, so can you. Reach out. Talk to your doctor, your pastor, a friend, a family member. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Document what's happening. Make a safety plan. And when you're ready, when you're truly ready, take that first step toward freedom. Because you deserve to be visible. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to take up space in this world without apology. And revenge. Real revenge isn't about hurting the person who hurt you. Real revenge is building a life so full, so joyful, so purposeful that they become irrelevant to your story. Real revenge is surviving, thriving, rising. That's what I did. And honey, if this old lady can do it, so can you. My name is Dorothy Mae Jenkins. I glued my husband to his bed. But that's not the end of my story. It's just the beginning.